Um, oh, okay. So here at the NIH, I am the head of the Health Communication and Behavior Unit, which is sort of a research unit that I'll talk about in a second. I'm also the director of the Immersive Simulation Program, which I will also be talking about. But I guess the other thing to know is that I am situated within the Social and Behavioral Research branch. So all of the research that I do and most of the research that I am engaged in here has to do with behavioral science, psychology, public health, things like that. And I'm within the Genome Institute. So my substantive research has to do with genetics and genomics, although my work in VR is a lot broader. So I will just start by telling you about the Immersive Simulation Program. So this is basically half of my job. Half of my job is to direct what is essentially a research core or a research facility. And so basically what we do is we consult on the integration of different emerging tech tools into the research programs of my colleagues here at NIH. Mostly within the Genome Institute, but we also collaborate with colleagues sort of elsewhere at NIH. And I should mention that those of you who have ever gotten a grant from NIH or similar probably think of NIH as a granting institution, which is what most of the NIH does, but there are also several intramural research programs where researchers just do basically research all the time. And that's the side of the NIH where I am. So I don't work on the money giving side of things. So we basically consult with other researchers, help them think about whether they want to, how they should integrate emerging tech, mostly XR, although we will dabble in other areas if it seems like it might be of benefit, how they might make their research better by using these tools. We also act as XR subject matter experts for many researchers and other folks at NIH who are just interested in thinking through problems with us or learning more about the technology, or who need people to review something, and so on and so forth. And then the other thing we do is really research and analysis and writing and talking about issues that we think are going to inform the field. And I say inform the fields because a lot of it is taking things from what we know around sort of medicine and behavioral science and so on, and bringing it to the XR community, but also taking what we know about XR and bringing it back to those communities in terms of how they might be able to integrate the tech into what they do. So this is just a few examples of stuff we've done relatively recently on those points. So on the left here are a couple examples of us, my team and I, writing about virtual reality and how that actually can be used to great benefit in areas such as social and personality psychology and behavioral medicine. Down on the bottom, top right, these are examples of where we have sort of done research and extrapolated from that research and written about issues around XR use that can be useful to the field in their work that they do. So we wrote, for example, a paper where we did a review of all of the basically all of the papers that were using tracking methods to do psychological research. So mostly position tracking, orientation, interpersonal distance, things like that. We've also done, this is an example of a piece I wrote about how and why you might validate or evaluate something that you make, essentially making sure that it works. That was for an XR audience. We just published, or actually it's still in press. It'll come out like in a couple days. We did a meta-analysis and looked at variations in cyber sickness by participant self-reported race, which is an area that had not been looked at before. And so this is about to come out. So these are some examples of where we have done sort of really XR focused research. And then down at the bottom are more sort of analysis and thought pieces around, some of the issues that I know you guys care about around privacy and things like that. And then also sort of future uses of XR. Okay, so just a couple really quick examples of some of the work that I've done in this area. So this is an example of a study where we wanted to figure out, we built this, what we call the VR buffet. You can see it in the upper right. People use it, we use that as a measure. So we want to know if learning about some medical topics changes the way parents choose food for their kids. So what we want to do is put parents in this VR buffet, have them walk around, choose food. And we'd like to be able to say that what they do in this environment actually translates to real life, right? So it tells us something about what that parent would do in a real buffet. So this is an example of a validation study we did where we, on the upper left here, we used pasta and red sauce. We had them serve virtual pasta, we had them serve real pasta, and sort of looked at how those two things lined up. And they lined up pretty well. So there is a really good size correlation in the sort of amounts of food that parents are choosing for their children in the real world and also in VR. So we were able to conclude from this that at least for this VR buffet, what we find does translate to real world behavior. And then this is one other example of work we've done also this time on the VR buffet. And here we were looking at a metric called path tortuosity. Oh, good, the video still works. It's basically, this is an overhead view of our VR buffet. This is basically the path that someone's walking around. And what we were interested in thinking about was whether using data from the path, we used a measure of essentially how curvy or how straight that path is, whether we could tell something about the psychological state that the parent was having while they were engaging in the behavior. And I won't go into all of the details of how we did it, but basically what we found is that we think that path tortuosity in the buffet can be used as a proxy for sort of effort and motivation. So if the parent is sort of trying harder, right, to make a good or a healthy plate for their kid, they might move in a more sort of curvy, tortuous path around the buffet. All right, so here is sort of the other half of what I do. So this is, you guys are probably getting all this stuff blocked too. Let's see if I can fix it up a little bit. This is my research hat. So this is my substantive research portfolio for the Genome Institute. And here I use VR in a lot of my work. I do a lot of work where I don't use VR, but I think of VR, kind of tongue-in-cheek. This is not an empathy machine situation, but I tongue-in-cheek kind of call it the VR crystal ball, right? Because what we're interested in genetics and genomics is really a fast-moving, emerging technology. And in genetics and genomics, things tend to get invented or discovered, and they move to consumers and patients really, really fast. People integrate them before we really know what all the benefits and the pitfalls of these technologies might be. So super short pipeline to being implemented. What we try to do is we try to study the influence of, talking about genetics, getting genetic tests, things like that, in clinical and in public health settings, and that we can kind of simulate the way that interactions around this kind of genetic information might take place, and thereby anticipate some of the harms or some of the benefits we might see for the future in these areas. And so then these are some images of some of the VR environments, clinical environments that we've used over the years. I'm going to give you one really, really simple example, kind of an old one now. But one of the first things we were interested in was about how people would sort of process and receive and understand genomics information that they received from a doctor. And so in this work, we were looking at whether racial concordance or racial match between a patient and the doctor who was giving them genetics information, how that might influence African-American adults' perception of their cancer risk. The information they were getting was in regards to cancer risk, based on the information that they were given. So on the right here, you can see the virtual humans that we used. Obviously, one was apparently African-American and one was apparently white. And our sample was all African-American adults. And so just one data point from the study, basically what we're looking at here is risk perception inaccuracy. So higher is worse. The higher the bar, the more inaccurate participants were when they when we asked them what they thought their risk was after the visit where they had been given risk by this virtual human provider. So essentially across the board, those participants who had a racially concordant, so same race virtual doctor, remembered their information more accurately. So there was actually a pretty big difference in how this information was processed based solely on the apparent race, of the virtual doctor. Obviously, what VR allows us to do here is change race without changing anything else about the interaction.
Susan, do you suspect that that is due to not feeling judged, or?
We suspect it's about trust. Now, we measured trust and we tried to look at trust as a potential mediator of the effect, and statistically it didn't mediate, but we still think it's about we still think it's about trust. Okay. Yeah, that's what we're thinking. It could be there could be some elements of that, but it's kind of hard to say from this one study. But so that's it. That's all the slides I brought with me. So I can stop sharing now.
I'm really curious, Susan, the presentation was fantastic. How much are you guys doing in the realm of vocal biomarkers and genomics and understanding, the vocal side of communication beyond visual or other modalities of communication in respect to VR as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have at times looked at some of the metrics of people's vocalization in VR, but it's not something we routinely do. And I'm not going to say that we're particularly good at doing it, but it is a measure that we have used in the past and have seen it connect to some of our behavioral measures that we've collected in VR.
It's fascinating. I'm curious, kind of, where do you see this all kind of going in the future, and what are you most excited about in the future of your research? Where do you see XRSI supporting this work in the future? How can we as a group, help you guys moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many directions that we're going. From a sort of my research perspective, genomics is a never-ending. We're moving a lot towards trying to help people predict risk for common health conditions like diabetes, obesity, heart disease, which is really inexact and not very good yet. But yet you can get that information from a bunch of direct-to-consumer companies or plenty of folks who want to help roll it out. So I think digging into that from a sort of content side is super interesting, and VR has proven to be a really important tool in being able to do that, because we're essentially studying healthcare encounters that don't exist, right? And so we have to sort of make them exist, which is what we do with the XR. From my other hat, I do think, it is a sort of benefit. It's a blessing and a curse. It's, all of the sort of data that comes out, I think is going to continue to allow us to figure out really interesting and important things about people's psychological states and sort of their intentions and things like that. And we haven't integrated eye tracking into any of the work that I've shown you here, but everything we're doing sort of going forward from here, we plan to. So the sort of, we've been working with some statistician colleagues to try and figure out new approaches for analyzing some of the movement data, some of the other data over time, because people tend to look at these things in sort of discrete ways. So sort of coming up with more metrics that are validated is, I think, something as a researcher, which is really important and exciting. And as a sort of human, it's scary as hell. But so, I think that tension is certainly one that you guys understand well. And that's another place where I've been doing some work and a lot of thinking. And then certainly this issue of validation of, helping people understand the importance of testing the applications they build and, figuring out under what circumstances they are best for who, and helping them understand cases under which maybe they're not having the intended effect. And then what do you do from there? I think is another really big issue right now.
Susan, amazing, remarkable research. I'm truly impressed. And you're right, with respect to data, all kinds of data. So especially we have been talking about at the council about coming up with sort of baseline taxonomies that could potentially become the standards and a baseline to potentially be like, okay, this type of data should be protected. Because currently what we see is like all of the biometric stuff data is like biometric data. And then that ways, you don't have this sort of a granular bifurcation. It's like, hey, this is biometric inference, or this is psychographic inference. And then this should be treated this way, and that should be treated this way. So we're kind of like in the midst of establishing that baseline taxonomy. And then one other aspect that, one of our council members, Divya, and then Callie was kind of exploring as well, is use of potentially genetic information data protection to establish kind of like what protection could be needed for neurodata or biometric inferred data. So like, what are your thoughts about this kind of approach? Because we have a baseline. Why not utilize it? We have a GIPA, kind of a law. So potentially even just utilizing it to create some kind of a baseline. And, your research literally kind of indicates that that's maybe the direction needed. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, in that, when I sort of think about and talk about those issues, I definitely draw on a lot of what happens in genetics. I think GINA, the privacy bill, goes a long way. And I think, I was here at the Genome Institute when it was passed, and it was just like this massive, like we did it. There are a lot of loopholes in GINA and a lot of things it doesn't cover. So there are areas where it's maybe not the best. Long-term care, some other things like that. But I think in general, I mean, it does a pretty good job of protecting a lot of what, your everyday individual might be concerned about in terms of use of their genetic information for discrimination. But there's a lot going on right now about genomic data sharing that results from research and mandated data sharing. Although re-identification is, a real possibility in some cases. So I think there's a lot of places where, a lot of people are really excited about it. There are several sort of indigenous communities and tribal councils and people who are like, whoa, you're getting this really, really wrong. And so, in some cases, whole swaths of data aren't able to be shared. I mean, it's basically, there's a lot to learn, but it's also kind of a mess, I guess, is what I would say. So I think on the legislation side, it's pretty good and could be better. But on the data sharing side, it's kind of a mess right now.
Got it. Yeah, good points. And, I think it would be great to sort of combine efforts or learn from you about these inferences and even share what we are kind of developing in the near future, if that's okay.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. And I think Callie was sort of also I think your question was a little related to like maybe genetic markers too, and I sort of skipped over that part, but I think that's something else have not done anything in, but I'm interested in.
I'm fascinated on the vocal biomarkers. It's some of the work, we're working on, kind of outside as in voice biomarkers. And I haven't been able to dive as deep as I'd like to.
Yeah.
In that, so it might be something that maybe between XRSI, your work and like the three of us might be able to do something really interesting in sort of a joint effort.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, there's so many things you can extrapolate, and then sort of thinking about, are there genetic profiles that predispose people to, experience XR in certain ways? And I mean, there's a million ways that these things could come together.
I know they've been able to diagnose, things like COVID and everything just from voice. So can we diagnose health conditions? Can we diagnose all of these different things and nuances over time, and combine that with movement, all these other things, but in an ethical and safe way alongside, these correct guidelines and taxonomies that we're putting together. And with a joint effort with this kind of council, how do we put that, in place? So this is where my brain goes. I can't think of anyone better to put that together than this council. So
Very cool.
Just to chime in on that as well, then, I think she may have even spoken here a few weeks ago, was Becky Inkster, who's amazing neuroscientist from Cambridge that's been doing a lot of research in this space. And it was also bringing together people to explore it as well. So she runs a conference called Digital Innovations in Mental Health. And a big focus of that is around sound and language and AI as well. I'll drop the link in the chat if that's useful.
Thank you. Valentino had his hand up.
Yes, yes, thanks, Rachel. Amazing presentation, Susan. Was very, very interesting. It was very interesting, the study about defining the mental state of people based on how they navigate the space. And are you converting that also in digital biomarkers? And what about the validation or certification of those digital biomarkers? Yeah,
so we are, I mean, it's all very exploratory, I'll say. So we have not yet validated it on another data set. We had a very unfortunate data collection problem with one of our recent studies. But I mean, that is the aim, is to really come up with some sort of modeling approaches and statistical approaches that, you know, one could try to validate, you know, for outcomes, psychological outcomes, things like presence, you know, things like that. I mean, the real rub, though, is that what you can validate it in one environment, but, you know, it doesn't necessarily translate to anything else, right? Mm-hmm. Just because movements are so much a part of what you're actually doing in XR. So, so the hope is to kind of come up with these kinds of approaches like path tortuosity in these environments that, you know, involve a lot of sort of walking and exploration behavior. But I do think they're going to have to be, you know, validated and explored in individual contexts, sort of, you know, I don't want to say every context individually, but, you know, for a while at least, I would think. So we're also working on a couple newer ones, but we'll see if those hold any water for us at least.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I've seen the study about cyber sickness and how it changes across population. And yes. Did you something similar with presence?
Yeah, we have. It is, we're just finishing writing it. But basically, you know, kind of a COVID project. I was talking with a friend of mine at FDA, and she was asking me if cyber sickness varied by race. And I was like, oh, why would it? Shouldn't. I'm sure it doesn't. But we have the data, you know, so we're like, okay, well, let's go look. And, you know, lo and behold, it does quite reliably. We don't know why, and we have some ideas, but, you know, so that, yeah, so it was one of those things where I was like, no, I'm sure it doesn't. And then lo and behold, the data told a different story. So then we went back and did presence as well. And we're seeing a similar effect there as well. So that one should be coming soon.
Waiting for that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Divya, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, just wanted to unmute myself. Yeah, so really, really interesting work. You know, I realize that there's a real opportunity here, given the data you just showed, to do a lot of patient education actually within healthcare. I mean, the opportunities are so vast, it's actually kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. I mean, I deal with patients all the time who come in pre-surgically and haven't even received properly the information to not eat, and then their surgeries get canceled, or their blood glucose is out of control, or they didn't take their, you know, hypertension medications. But, you know, I'm thinking more broadly of even just helping people with, especially in communities that have been marginalized and don't feel represented in medicine, to receive information like on their diabetes care, or on just things like exercise, and how to potentially receive this information in a way. I mentioned the word judgment because there is a sense that when a healthcare provider is giving somebody information like this, people often don't even want to share because they think that they are being judged. And perhaps if they are receiving it from somebody who they perceive, or an avatar that they perceive as racially concordant, and one that they can sort of tap into on a regular basis. Hey, I need a little more help here. That's a really beautiful use case. And I don't know if you recall when 23andMe first started doing like sending data back to consumers with genetic prediction, and they had to be stopped. They were stopped by the FDA because there was no counseling around this. I'm wondering if some of this work that you have done would satisfy also those counseling requirements if they took place in VR or something like that.
You are absolutely reading my mind, because so yeah, those are both things we're working on. So in one case, now not so much the sort of diabetes care, but we are creating an educational tool to help explain the concept of gene environment interaction, which is something that really comes into play when you're thinking about how genes will work in any sort of common health condition. And so, I think people have been creating, virtual humans, chatbots, whatever, to sort of to offload some of the work. But I think, like, we need to be thinking more about how we can actually use those tools to make it so much better. And so we're trying out a few tactics around sort of experiencing, basically experiencing situations from the body of someone with a different genotype is essentially where we're going with it. And we're hoping that it's going to be, really effective for educating folks about some of these issues. Although, we'll do the RCT pretty soon. But I agree that patient education has like unending possibilities there. And then in terms of the counseling, so we have a genetic counseling training program here at our institute, and I've been talking with them for quite a long time about figuring out ways that we might at least be able to do training in this context, because the sort of the counseling piece is such a heavy lift in genetic counseling. But then also, there being a shortage of genetic counselors, are there ways to leverage some of this kind of stuff for counseling in a way that would be beneficial, rather than just cool. So those are both really important, and they're both things we're thinking about.
And then just as far as the idea of following up on the IRB for basic collecting these huge swaths of data, I have considered that in a different context, but in terms of biometrics, that's an interesting one. Have you thought about ways in which you might incentivize companies to voluntarily create some of these, or at least buy into some of these IRB sorts of structures? And do you envision that these would transcend borders? Because obviously, what's being deployed is Web 3.0 or spatial internet or metaverse, whatever you want to call it, is obviously it's transnational.
Yeah. And so back when we wrote this piece, I mean, that was definitely the hiccup, right? Is like, how do you enforce that? And at the time it was sort of, well, maybe we can get people to care about it. And we can't get people to care about it. So, a lot of it does kind of come down to companies who want to sort of have the appearance of being, sort of the good guys in the space, or legislation, right? And I think the point was really that sort of the model of the IRB does all of the things that we would want done around some of the biometrics use, but it might have to look slightly different to be able to apply it in that space. Although, realistically, my IRB doesn't even think about the biometric stuff. I have to be like, well, there is this piece of it. But, I think all it would take is a little education, and, our mind at least is used to genetic data. So it's got a lot of parallels.
Well, I hate to interrupt this discussion. This is so good, but we do have to mind the time. So Susan, thank you so much for being here with us today. And we will certainly follow up on everything that was discussed.
Okay. Absolutely. Well, it was a real pleasure to meet some of you and see others of you that I've met before. And thanks. It's such a pleasure to have a conversation with such a well-versed audience. So thank you.
Thank you, and you're welcome to stay if you have time. But
Yeah, I have to run over to another meeting, but thank you. Great to see you.
Thank you.
Lovely to meet you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, so next on our agenda is a discussion from a patient point of view. And we've had a perfect segue into that when we just talked about educating patients. So I'd like to introduce Amy, who has experience as a patient. Go ahead, Amy, please.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me. I love I love the picture. That's me in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. That's one of the Great Lakes. So yeah, just like real quick about me. I'm an artist, writer, musician, actor. I'm a volunteer for XRSI. I'm working on an initiative, trying to build awareness through social media right now. And I'm a sort of we call it an independent researcher in all things medical device regulation, also neurotechnology, and especially VR, AR, MR. So basically, why I'm here is I had sort of, I follow a lot of, I guess, like all the newsletters from the CDRH, which makes my inbox bonkers because they send out a lot of communications. But one of the things I got was this patient advisory council for AR, VR. Seemingly came out of nowhere. And I got very excited. I was like, okay. Before I sort of wanted to like confirm my presence at that thing, I did reach out to XRSI on the Slack and just to make sure what XRSI's presence is, and can I align with that? And we sort of figured out what to do. So I'm in contact with the administrator of that event, and I hope to have the floor for as much time as there will be, given how many representatives from the patient community. So in terms of like my sort of patient experience, I'm coming through the lens of mental health. I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder at the age of 14 during a hospitalization after a suicide attempt. And since then, I have been in treatment for that illness through medication and therapy. I also recently had 15 treatments of electroconvulsive therapy. It was 12 unilateral and 3 bilateral. They were not effective, unfortunately. After that, I was able, through talking to experts, to be re-diagnosed as atypical depression. And that resulted in a switch from SSRIs and mood stabilizers and all these various combinations of medications that I've been on for the last 15 years to an MAO inhibitor. And I was able to see some results from that. So I'm very grateful to be speaking from a very different place than I was perhaps a year ago. Now, in terms of what we're talking about today, I am interested in what AR, or I guess either one really, AR or VR, could offer to someone like me who is still managing my mental illness on a day-to-day, who is struggling with the costs of out-of-pocket therapy, and meanwhile trying to navigate in network therapy and not having great experiences there. And then sort of dealing with medical debt as well. So as someone who just has a personal investment in AR, VR, I'm sort of looking for, people talk about the killer app. I'm very interested in what that might look like for therapy in VR. And the experiences that I've had have been varied. I know that you have on the Oculus marketplace, you have a lot of sort of these wellness applications. And I think, just from my own research, the sort of interplay between a medical device versus a wellness device offers a bit less regulatory oversight. I've also been a part of sort of a social world with sort of a mental health spin. My experience of that was somewhat impersonal, which is understandable, given the sort of nascent stage of a mainstream adoption of this technology, as I understand it. I've also reached out directly to a company that was really one of the first hits on Google when I looked up VR therapy, who did highlight behavioral and mental health as one of their applications. But when I actually got on the phone with someone, they were able to verify that it's actually not something they currently offer. They're much more on the occupational therapy and the physical therapy. And they also in New York only work with Medicare. So that was a bit of a stopping point for me. Of course, you know, the health insurance topic is a whole other one. Yeah, I guess for me, I'm just interested in what you folks are seeing coming down the pike for someone like me. Like, do you think that having regular VR therapy could be something that is an effective treatment, as well as something that's more cost effective? And also, is there sort of a regulatory oversight in terms of introducing applications like this into, say, the Oculus marketplace? Because I know that through this wellness versus medical device, you know, it's really up to the company to self-designate, as far as I understand. And if that's the case, then what am I sort of signing on to when I say, hey, I'm interested, I want to put on a headset and go through this experience, you know, who's on the other end, and also what is happening to my data. I mean, just the fact that I might be either through a wellness device accessing something that's related to my mental health through Facebook, or if I'm getting a headset in the mail, you know, do I know anything about that? Is there regulations in place that sort of protect me? Because the idea of sort of building up a profile somewhere in a database as neurodiverse with previous suicidal ideation feels a little scary to me. And I know this already exists through my medical records, but you have that HIPAA protector in place, which hopefully means something. I can hear the dogs baying, so I must be saying something. But that's sort of where I'm at. I have a lot of questions, a lot of sort of intellectual interest in it. And I'm also an activist for global social equity and sort of intersectional unity. So I'm interested in what's coming, what's available, and how it can be scaled in a way that is, you know, to use the accepted nomenclature, safe and effective. So that's sort of where I'm at today. And thank you so much for giving me some time to share my experience.
Hey, Emmy, just want to thank you. So profound, your experience. And wow, like this kind of a critical thinking from a patient is like platinum, gold, diamond level, like amazing. Like you generally, you know, because patients generally are so concerned about just feeling better, this level of critical thinking may never go into play. So having someone like you is really, really amazing. And obviously, right place, as I said in the chat, there are several resources and a lot of the people are already mentioning it, but I want to say Dr. Becky Inkster is currently conducting some research. There is another AI, it's a bot, Wiser, just got approved like literally this week from FDA for use for mental health. So there are just some really incredible developments, and I'll leave it to everyone else to kind of add to it. But I know that when it comes to mental health and use of XR, and not just XR, but XR inevitably intersects with brain-computer interfaces. So she's actually utilizing all this stuff to literally pursue that very thing. And then she's also collaborating with us on the kind of a data protection aspect. So that's a person that you should definitely, and will be honored to facilitate at least a call with her. And then I'm sure she would love to, pursue further whatever she decides. But yeah, everybody else I'm sure has tons of recommendations for you. And again, thank you for speaking at FDA. And if you're sharing your story publicly, that's just like, I'm just amazed at the courage that you have to be able to, share that for benefits of all. And XRSI will be presenting. We have a 15-minute slot there. So we'll collaborate with the council to figure out what we are presenting.
Yeah, the other thing I'll just add is that, I'm blessed with the entrepreneurial spirit myself. So I'm currently doing a lot of research on AI therapy, and especially for patients that are very, there's a high correlation of sort of provider burnout, things like reverse transference. This is all language that I'm learning, but I do a lot of research first, so there is that. And also in terms of neurotechnology, that's also a major, I guess, hobby of mine, where I do a lot of my own independent research on, especially with the storied brain-computer interface. It's very top of mind for me.
I'm just really inspired actually hearing you talk, Emmy. Thank you so much. When it comes to innovation and, XR, whether it's AR, VR, AI, really any of this new technology, I firmly believe that the best innovations are going to be patient-driven. They're going to come from people who have experienced the need for innovation from the ground up. And they're going to come from patients, they're going to come from doctors, they're going to come from nurses, the people who have experienced this directly. I got into this field myself from my own experiences like you. I know several people, on this call right now have similar stories that have driven them to pursue their own fields for similar reasons. And the more that we kind of share those experiences and bring those into guidelines for safety, for product development, the better these things will be. So, one, thank you for your advocacy on it. I think that that's absolutely critical. So if you're looking at things like major depression, major depressive disorder, there's a lot in the VR world. I'm seeing a lot in terms of meditation as a first step. Personally, I think that that's a very foundational platform, but there's a lot more that needs to be done. There's a lot of work that's being done in exposure therapy, where you're looking at recreating scenarios that you can build up a tolerance for, handling situations that make you anxious. That's particular in things like social anxiety, or things like phobias, where we're seeing a lot of advancement in the mental health space. We're seeing that as well in the fields of around things like OCD. There's been quite a number of advancements here in the VR space, in things like WISA or other AI aspects. What's really interesting is you still need the human input for that. So part of the challenge that I see, and I think that there do need to be thoughts around that, is that when you have dysfunctional thinking, which is what happens when we struggle with our own mental challenges, is if we're training the AI based on dysfunctional thoughts, we need to also train it in order to correct that dysfunctional thinking in a way that feels correct and natural to each person, which is not the same. The way that I correct my dysfunctional thinking, which everyone has that, whether wherever we fall on the healthiness spectrum, is going to be totally different than how you do it. So, there's still a lot of work to be done. And I think it's really important to get involved in that advocacy. So however myself or the council, I think, can support kind of your goals in this would be, I'd love to learn how kind of, I know I can support that for sure.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Amy. Anybody else have questions for Amy? We appreciate you being here with us and hoping to hear more from you and people like you and see what patients can do to advocate for themselves and improve the quality and the safety of our treatments. All right. So we have some announcements. There's 4 announcements that I have. I'll be real quick. There was a survey, like a Google form that we sent out last week, and some people did fill it out, and we're very grateful for that. It's a very basic form that we use to update our records since the council is 2 years old, and some people have evolved into different areas of interest, and we want to know what that is. So we're updating records, but would appreciate if you guys took a second to update the information. That's number 1. Number 2 announcement is that, this is actually number 3, but I'll go with that. Valentino just recently was interviewed by VR for Health. Please take a look at that. It's very, very informative. And Divya is speaking on May 26th at the Actionable Intelligence Network. And word is that we can get a discount or even free tickets if we want to participate in that. So if you're interested, let me know, please.
Oh, that's a good point, actually, Rachel. Yeah. Anybody who does want to participate, we should pass that information along to Satish.
Okay. Yeah, he did say, originally he said there was a 15% discount, but later he said he could get even better. He can do better than that. So, and then
I asked because they're not paying speakers, so I said, hey,
yeah,
can we get some tickets for people who are, yeah.
Very good. And then the last one is, speaking of that patient engagement advisory committee, there is going to be a virtual breakout session that they're hosting. The information about that is buried deep inside of their information, so it's not obvious. So that's why I'm mentioning that. Please register for that. If you're interested in attending it. They're limiting it to 150 people, so there's some advantage to doing it early. That's all the announcements I have. Anybody have anything else?
I just want to respect to the patient advisory, because we have a maybe 15 or 10-minute slot. I would love to solicit and prioritize messaging to what we should represent at the FDA advisory meeting. And I think everybody, including Emmy here, it would be great to just, once I have the draft of that slide deck, I would circulate it and share it with everyone. So you can help me sort of prioritize the messaging. Like, as a council, what would we like to inform everyone at the FDA, and maybe just of the work or our current understanding of what should be the priorities, et cetera, et cetera. So that would be really, really valuable to help prioritize, because there's just so much work to share, but then we only have 10 minutes. So what makes most sense? And I know, Rachel, I don't think we mentioned, but Dr. Nduka is going to be sharing some of his work in the future. Did we mention that?
We did not. I have it on the slide, but I did not get there. So Dr. Charles Nduka is going to be speaking next time, and as well as Jenna Johnson, who has done a paper with us, a case study last year. So we want to hear about that.
Just one request I want to make for Dr. Nduka's session. I'm inviting some of the collaborators that we have. We're working with NIST and Joel Charlton, who's our advisor for AR authentication grant work. So we're using these XR devices to do authentication. And I think it's worthwhile to invite anybody else who could potentially benefit from this kind of a session. So maybe, Rachel, we can provide a bit of an abstract so that council member could extend the invite to anyone that could benefit from it, because this is a very like research focused device that really helps like further insights. And I'm sure Dr. Nduka will share more information, but yeah, I feel like beyond the council, we should invite people who could potentially benefit from this device and the work that Dr. Nduka is going to share.
I agree. And Susan, who was here today, certainly should be interested too. All right. Anybody else have any interesting information to share?
I've just popped it in the chat, but an event that may be of interest to everyone as well is VR for Rehab. I'm not sure if it's on people's radars, but it's a European initiative that's been set up where they are running funding programs, hackathons, and are doing a conference soon as well. So they
Sarah,
might be
are you
something to
going?
connect with.
Are you going to join the event in Netherlands?
No, my Dutch colleagues are, so Nikki and Joe from Deep will be there, but I will be
Okay.
having a holiday in the south of France, unfortunately.
Got it.
Are you
No, I'll
going?
be there. I'll be
Oh,
there.
great.
So yeah, because there is the twin events dedicated to pain, VR for pain. So we are going to join the event just presenting our abstract about Tommy. So yeah.
Oh, brilliant.
Maybe I can join. I can meet your team. That would be amazing. But
Oh,
you're
I
not
would
going to join.
love that. Absolutely. And yeah, and if you're in town then and you fancy visiting Monabanda, they're just over in Utrecht. And I think you'd had lots of really interesting discussions because they also work very much in youth mental health as well.
Awesome.
So they would love to meet you, and they're the funnest, greatest people in the world. Not that I'm biased. So.
Actually, I'm going to London the next week, but I don't know if you are in Brighton, London, close or not. If you are in UK,
I'm having quite a fun few weeks, so I'll be out of the country until the 19th of July.
Got
I'm
it.
afraid.
Okay, good.
Oh, which is such a shame because I'd love to see you. Damn.
There will
We'll
be
make it
new.
happen. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll keep you posted on movements, but it would be ace to see you. All right, I've got a dash, I'm afraid, guys, but so good to see you all, and hopefully catch you next month.
Bye.
See you later. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
See you
Everyone.
next time.
See you
See
next
you.
time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Goodbye.